Welcome to the Liberating River, where spiritual freedom meets soul aligned wealth. I'm Wanda. Have you ever heard the story about the man in the flood? So there's a man sitting in his house and the rain is falling. You know how it is, right? Nothing alarming, just the kind of rain where you look out the window and it's soothing. You might say, let me grab my blanket, give me something warm to drink, right? But then you notice the water starts rising. It moves from the street to the sidewalk, from the sidewalk to the porch, from the porch to your front door. The man realizes, okay, something is wrong because he's noticing the progression. This is not a regular storm. This is a flood. He opens the door to look around for his neighbors. He doesn't see anyone and prays to God for help. Someone passing by in a fishing boat saw him and yelled out, said, "Hey, come on, get in. It's getting really bad." And the man says, No, I'm waiting on God. God is going to provide. So what would you do? The boat leaves. The water keeps rising. The man can't close the door now, so he moves upstairs. The flood water is being steady. The water has completely taken over the first floor of the house. The furniture is floating. The walls are starting to get soaked. Everything he knew as stable is now unstable. Now a rescue team comes by in another boat, larger boat, right? The man is looking out the upstairs window, because I say he moved upstairs, and that rescuer says, "Hey, sir, come down. You can't stay there. We have to evacuate and move to higher ground." But again, the man says, "No, it's all right. The rain will stop soon. Jehovah Jireh will protect us." So what do? They leave. The water keeps rising. He's confused because now things are getting worse. He had to move to the roof. So now, as you can imagine, the roof is completely taken over by water. A helicopter comes by. They drop a ladder and they say, "Sir, grab on. We can pull you up." And the man says, "No, I'm waiting on God. God got me." Eventually, the man drowns. When the man is in the presence of God, he is angry and says, "God, I believed in you. I trusted you. Why didn't you save me?" And all God says is, "I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter." Now, I know many of us have heard some version of this story before. And usually we hear about this story as a lesson of opportunity, right? About not missing the help that comes because it doesn't look the way we expected. About not being so rigid in our idea of how God, life, wisdom, or support is supposed to show up, that we reject the very thing we prayed for. We have heard that, right? That concept is very powerful. I completely agree. But today, we are going to look at this story from a different vantage point. Because when I think about the man in that flood, when I think about that story, I don't just think about missed opportunities. I think about identity. I think about the version of himself he was trying to preserve. I think about the internal box he was trapped inside of. Because somewhere in his mind, he had already decided what faith looked like, how God should and would move. He had already decided what obedience looked like. I'm going to sit here and wait on God. He had already decided what trust looked like. God said, "Ask and it shall be given." God only moves and works in this manner. And anything outside of that box, even if it came directly to save your life, did not count and was wrong. That vantage point made me think, what if the greatest box wasn't the one we put God in? Let's think about that. What if the greatest box was the one we put ourselves in? Because truthfully, many of us have spent so much time talking about how we limit God, how we limit possibility, how we limit faith, how we limit abundance, how we limit opportunity. And yes, all of those are real and true, but we rarely ask the question, what happens when we limit ourselves? What happens when life sends us a boat, but we don't get in because people like us don't do that? What happens when life sends us a helicopter and we don't grab the ladder because that's not how I was raised? What happens when freedom shows up, but we reject it because it doesn't match the picture we created in our mind? Our assumption. What happens when expansion arrives, but we call it confusion because we were taught to only be one thing or look at something one way? That is where we are going today. How we're going to approach it today is this: the box you never chose. And you know what that is? It's the identity box. Those family expectations, those cultural expectations, that career expectation, that religious expectation, that gender expectation, and the quiet truth that many people never consciously choose their identity. They inherited it. They inherited a role. They inherited a script. They inherited a way of surviving, a way of being acceptable, a way of being praised, a way of staying safe. And then one day you wake up and wonder why your life feels in disarray. Not because you failed, not because you are ungrateful, but because you are confused, but because you have been living inside a box you never chose. So today we are going to talk about the box. Not to shame it, not to hate it, not to dishonor the people who may have handed it to you and to us, but to recognize it. Because you cannot step out of the box you refuse to see. You cannot expand into a life you keep calling disobedience, rebellion, selfishness, or confusion. Sometimes what we call confusion is really expansion trying to introduce itself. Sometimes what we call as restlessness is really your soul saying, this identity is too small now. A change needs to happen. Sometimes what we call a crisis is actually the beginning of self regulation, the beginning of self recognition. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about the box you never chose. You know, one of the reasons identity boxes are so powerful is because most of them do not feel like boxes at first. They feel like home. They feel normal. They feel like responsibility, like wisdom, tradition, loyalty, faithfulness, maturity. They feel like this is just how life is. And that is what makes them hard to question. Because if something feels normal long enough, what do? We stop recognizing it as a choice. We stop recognizing it as a pattern, as conditioning. We simply call it what? Reality. But not everything you call reality is actually reality. Some of it is repetition. Some of it is family culture. Some of it is fear that got passed down and dressed up as wisdom. Some of it is survival that became tradition. Some of it is limitation that became identity. And that is why it is important to pause and ask, did I choose this or did I inherit this? Did I choose this version of myself? Did I choose this role? Did I choose this career path? Did I choose this belief about what is possible? Did I choose the way of loving? Did I choose the way of making money? Did I choose these ways? Did I choose this way of staying quiet? Did I choose this way of being the dependable one? Or did I simply think about it? Or did I simply become what the environment required? That is a very different question because some of us are not living from identity. We are living from adaptation. We adapted to our family. We adapted to our community. We adapted to religious environments. We adapted to gender expectations. We adapted to workplaces. We adapted to what got rewarded. We adapted to what kept us from being criticized. We adapted to what kept us from being abandoned. And over time, adaptation became our personality. I will share this with you. I grew up in a family environment where I was told to be quiet, basically be seen, not heard. I had no voice. I had questions, ideas, thoughts, but was silenced every time. And I really felt worthless. I was confused, but the truth of the matter is, what could I do? I was getting tired of getting in trouble from wanting to talk and, in my opinion, to add to conversations. So I adapted and I learned to be quiet. I learned to silence myself. I learned to understand, I guess, some people don't have voices. So I started talking. If I was asked a question, though, of course, spoken to, I would speak up. I would, present an answer of some kind. But what I realized is that being forced into that box of being quiet, that affect of no, let me say it this way. That affected me, that affected my personality, and it infected my heart. Did you hear me? It affected me. And then if you think of cause and effect, it affected me. It affected my personality and it infected my heart. And if you notice the pattern of what I'm talking about today, that created my identity. So people always called me the quiet one, the shy one. That conditioning set and created and stayed with me until my 30s. I was afraid to speak at work. I was afraid to even speak around my friends. I thought everyone would shut me down and shut me up. I'll be completely transparent. I attempted suicide a number of times because I hated how life was. I felt like I I felt like I would always be criticized in life, and this was what life was. Do you know how bad it really was? Let me tell you this. It could be simple to you, but I think it spoke volumes, right? This is how bad it was. I never wanted to order food, especially if I was around friends. My thought was, what if I ordered the wrong thing? Compared to who and compared to what? I wasn't thinking that ways then. I'm thinking that ways now. What if? What if they criticize what I get? So I ordered what the majority ordered. Adaptation became my personality. It became my foundation. Survival became identity. Performance became my character. And the box became me. Boxes become us. That is why sometimes when people begin to change, they feel like they are losing themselves. I know I did. But we are not losing ourselves. What was being lost for me was the extremely old version of me. So you wind up losing the version of yourself, ourselves, that was built to survive a system you no longer belong to. That is a major difference. There is a difference between losing yourself and losing your conditioning. There is a difference between betraying yourself and disappointing expectations of
others, between being lost and being in transition. There is a difference between rebellion and revelation. The old identity begins to break down because your life has outgrown it. That's what happened to me.
Stay tuned. To be continued. Coming next week.